Welcome to Boston Real Estate Times. Our guest today is architect Mark Pelletier. He is a principal at Maugel Architects. As a principal at the firm, he leads Science and Advanced Technology Group, and we are going to talk to him about life sciences design. So, Mark, welcome to our show, and thank you very much for your time.
Pandra, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Now, I want to get back right away into our discussion. And I want to start with, wherever we see in the major life sciences clusters in the United States, we see there is a real boom going on for the demand for the life sciences facilities. And my
Yeah,
question
we,
to you is how the architects and landlords and owners are responding to that demand.
yeah. Well, first, we're very fortunate to live in Massachusetts. It's a trending hotspot for the life science industry, particularly the life science has begun to grow outside of the Boston area into the suburbs, and we're seeing a lot of activity in those areas like Waltham, Lexington, Wakefield, Bedford, Burlington, and in particular Worcester as well.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of growth, a lot of activity, and it's really stirred up the commercial market, if you will. A lot of building and property owners are trying to respond appropriately to the high demand of lab space.
So now, and what the life sciences companies want, for example, in terms of space, because suddenly there is this boom going on, and what type of space they are looking for, especially if you talk in the Massachusetts context.
Yeah, well, the pandemic has really become an eye opener to the industry. It used to be all of the life science companies wanted to be in Boston and the Cambridge area, particularly because they were around their peers. They were in a very active area with um, the support of banks and institutions that wanted to fund the sciences. And of course, they were near colleges with all the talent. So originally, they wanted to be in the Boston area. As they expand into the suburbs, what we're noticing is they want a similar feel. So they want a place, right?
Hmm.
And they want to feel like they're part of something,
Hmm.
whether it's a smaller community or a park. But when we respond with whether it's repurposing a building or designing a new building, it becomes a key part of their strategy because place matters to the user, both to attract the talent and create a condition that leads to innovation and breakthroughs in science.
Sure. So now also if you can talk a little bit in much more specific way, the differences in their, if you have noticed anything in demand for what type of office space they want, what type of lab they want. Is there still, because of the technology has changed, are they still focused on wet labs or dry labs are okay? If you can just throw a little bit light on that aspect.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, the pandemic has had an influence on the way the users are using space and science in particular technology. So um, years ago, we used to design labs in silos, right? We wanted to protect the users and keep them in the like science together. Now the science has evolved to a point where they want to have open space, multifunctional design space. So we purposely create that space so that they're crossing paths
Hmm.
for interaction and collaboration. Um, the digital world has become a great influencer on the lab space as well. So there's a high demand for power and larger workspaces, particularly for modeling and the servers that are used to support that equipment. Sustainable design has become a big influencer in the lab space most recently. The users, which are our younger generation, are really concerned about energy efficiency, ergonomics, and health and well-being, the
Sure.
quality of
So
life.
Mark, how do you reconcile, uh, this high demand for energy for the labs, and then also there is a lot of demand coming up from the various states and municipalities about in the upcoming years about zero carbon.
About the carbon footprint,
Yes, yes.
yeah. So the equipment's getting much better. We're being more thoughtful in the way that we design spaces for the users with natural light. The real challenge for us is designing flexible mechanical systems. The users of the lab space want the flexibility in their labs. So a lot of times what we're doing is creating zones. So zones for equipment and then zones for workspace so
Hmm.
that those zones can be easily adapted to um, more modern equipment or evolving equipment as the technology moves on. It doesn't mean you have to revamp the entire lab. We have space for it and ability to adapt.
Okay. So now this leads to another question that we are reading and we are seeing that many landlords and developers they want to take advantage of this boom, especially for the lab space. And there's a lot of talks going on in converting or retrofitting existing buildings into lab space. So if you can just talk a little bit about retrofitting versus a new lab space and cost and design challenges, etc.
Yeah, it's really a response to high demand and time to market, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of the property owners are responding to the industry by saying, I have a perfectly good building here and it's in the right location. And how can I convert this office space to a lab space? There are challenges involved with it, particularly because the buildings were designed for a different purpose. So geometry becomes a big key element in lab layout. Of course, lab space is probably amongst the most highest cost per square foot as far as construction goes.
Hmm.
So you're in rents for those lab spaces. I'm seeing them reaching, you know, anywhere between, well, it used to be 50 to $100. Now it's between 50 and $100 a square foot triple net,
Hmm.
and I mean, it's amazing the value and cost behind developing labs. But I look at all types of buildings and try to evaluate them for the applicability of a lab space, depending on the users. It seems to be our biggest demand right now. Last week, I looked at 3 buildings to convert from
Hmm.
office to life science.
In
And
urban or suburban areas?
excuse me?
In urban or suburban or both?
Suburban.
Suburban.
So
Okay.
these were particularly in Burlington.
Hmm.
Um, I did a conversion to 4 buildings in Lexington recently, and all very successful. The challenges are floor loadings and um, obviously the chemistry of the labs. If you want to get into the details, it's office buildings weren't designed with the fire rating that is typically designed for lab space. So
Sure.
if you have a heavy wet lab that has intense chemical quantities, we have to adjust for that and try to accommodate that within a building that's existing becomes challenging.
Sure.
We create control areas which allow us to maximize our chemical quantities, but depending on the type of chemicals, we do have some limitations and some challenges ahead of us when we're converting an existing building.
So now my question to you is, as a layman, when I hear about lab, I think about chemicals and gases,
Yeah.
and right away, it raises my, temperature here, saying, oh my God, I don't want to have office next to lab where there's a chance of, leaking gas or some sort of a infection or virus coming out. Do you have any study or anything you can talk about the reaction of the neighbors to conversions?
It's most of these conversions are happening in business districts,
Hmm.
so it's not um, really opposed by the residents. Like they're not surrounded by residential neighborhoods. But what I will say, a lot of the communities are seeing the opportunity
Hmm.
for these developments because they bring a lot of money. They bring very modern, safe building types to the community. So what we are seeing a lot of is where community towns will members will create an overlay. And so if a lab use may not have been allowed in the past, they're allowing it, particularly as part of a mixed use or a blended use in the community, because they're seeing the benefit. I
Hmm.
will say that, as a designer of lab buildings, um, I think I probably years ago, maybe as a young kid, I might have had the same impression. Lab spaces like GE used to be down the street, and who knows what they're building in there,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Yes.
um, the codes and the science has made these types of facilities much safer.
Hmm.
Um, we have a lot of protocols in place. If you're designing, for example, a biosafety lab level, you know, 5 or 4, there's the protocols are in place. As designers, we have to follow those protocols, and that allows for those to be safe for the operators as well as the community.
Okay. Have you, Mark, worked also on a manufacturing facility for one of these companies, or you have been just?
Yeah, it's almost come hand in hand. The lab spaces have moved to the suburbs with light manufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
and so what we're seeing a lot of are what we call CGMPs, but it's the space where they're doing research and development and the manufacturing. And the companies, the users are finding the benefit in the suburbs because they're getting
Sure.
lower rents,
Then more space.
more space, and they need more space because they're using uh, um, large equipment that requires tall ceilings. We're seeing 32 feet to be the desired height, clear height space for some of this manufacturing. And I will say it's kind of odd as an architect to have office um, building owners come to me and ask me if it's feasible to remove a floor out of a building
Hmm.
to accommodate the flex space needed for this light manufacturing.
So it is
Uh,
happening that people are asking you to remove the floors.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's amazing.
Well, this is the first
Mostly,
time I'm hearing.
well, it's actually quite brilliant
Hmm.
in some ways because again, it all goes back to time to market. So these users, these life science companies, they need to hear that they can be in a building in 8 to 12 months.
Hmm.
And so if you had to go through the whole planning stage before after they sign a lease, they're not willing to wait that time. So I
Hmm.
have property owners asking me to come up with designs,
Hmm.
and then we're doing cost estimates and feasibility studies to remove floors to provide buildings with office space, lab space, and then light manufacturing space. And so we white box the building and do a mock-up lab and have parts of the floor removed already, and the landowner, the building owner, can with confidence say to the prospective tenant, we can have this done in 8 months and
Mhm.
it will cost X.
Sure. Now, again, in media and also some in the industry, put everything lumped together in life sciences. And we know that there is a pharmaceutical, there is a med tech, there is a, medical devices firms, etc. Is there any different or more or less they fit the same model of life sciences companies? If you can just talk a little bit about that.
Is there you mean, is there a difference in the design approach?
Design, yeah, or needs, their needs.
Um, Manufacturing, of course, any medical device usually has a heavy manufacturing requirement,
Hmm.
which lends itself to large clean rooms.
Hmm.
So those types of buildings, um, we look to put dunnage on the roof to support the mechanical equipment and large volumes of space. Um, for the most part, it really depends on the type of lab. If it's um, yeah, we try to design for the specific lab use, so the space requirements haven't really changed,
Hmm.
but the the way we use the buildings have, as I had mentioned, we're trying, almost every industry across the board is looking for open concept. And it was interesting because there was a short period of time where we thought COVID was going to change that.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And we were designing lab spaces during COVID, and it was amazing. Um, the lab spaces kind of defaulted back to the stainless steel benches and the
Hmm.
stainless steel surfaces and white sterile walls. But I think that is going to slowly work its way back in trending towards the more modern approach with vibrant colors and interactive spaces. Um, so it really depends on the science because that there are influencers. Um, if you're working in the bio medical area, um, you need space for generators, backup generators, because they
Hmm.
can't afford to lose their science.
Hmm.
If you're working with nasty chemicals like ethanol or something like that, that's very flammable. You need, the appropriate mechanical systems and safety features in place. So if power goes out, you're still ventilating the space and it's still safe for the users. So these are the types of things that we look at. It really hasn't, it really doesn't change across the industry because they're all very different in their own unique way.
Now, at least, in Massachusetts, we have seen that some towns have been very, positively responding to demand for the life sciences facilities. Lexington is another example, or
Right.
Burlington, or some other, Watertown. Now, is there some sort of a skepticism about so much life sciences growth in planning departments of various towns?
I not that I've heard of. I've been pretty intimate with Lexington and Watertown and active in Worcester and Burlington, and it doesn't seem, the trend doesn't seem to be slowing. It
Yeah,
only seems
sure.
to be
Okay.
continuing on a very steady path. Um, when you look at the market sectors, Maugel Architects, we're in multiple market sectors. We're in commercial, industrial, life science, and multifamily. And life science has been very steady for the last 6 years.
Sure. Now, before I come to your last word, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. And that is that, as we saw that, the Cambridge was a real hub of life sciences companies. And now, again, that a lot of companies are moving because there's not much space there in Cambridge, especially in the Kendall Square area.
Yeah.
So, as an architect, thinking at the grand scale, how do you think Cambridge is going to look like in next 10, 15 years? What will be there in Cambridge?
What will we do with Cambridge?
Yes.
Cambridge is going to continue to be the hub of life
Hmm.
science. I think the real sophisticated companies want to have a tangible location, a lab space in the
Hmm.
Cambridge area. Cambridge will always have the um, talent, the
Hmm.
young talent, local, the college, the supporting colleges, MIT, Harvard, all of those are attractors to these life science companies. And of course, the investors aren't going anywhere.
Sure.
All of the banks and institutions are in the Cambridge area. And as long as these scientists can go to the local Starbucks and rub shoulders and talk about their
Sure.
science to one another, it will always remain in Cambridge.
Excellent. Good. And your last word on the life sciences space design.
um, it's here to stay. We have to be thoughtful as designers and try to keep up with the technology and look to incorporate the technology into our designs. You know, we look for every advantage to maximize the potential of space within labs, even looking vertically. Now, it used to be that lab space, benchtop was the most valuable space in a lab, and it still is, which is why we start to look at ways of being able to move equipment in and out. And we look to the technology to help us advance our
I'm
design.
glad you mentioned about the benchtop and the technology. The one thing I forgot to ask you, and I'm going to ask you right now, is how is AI, artificial intelligence, is changing the design or lab design?
We for the design side of it, it's really interesting and it's a lot of fun. When I was a young architect and we were just drawing on paper, we had to do hand sketches and things to help the scientists visualize their space. Now we sit in meetings with them and we model writing right in front of them, and I will put in the exact equipment they're using.
Hmm.
So if a lab user has a mass spectrometer here and a hood over here, we put them in that space on the screen and they can see it and they can understand, oh, I need to take this product from here and put it to here. And instead of going across the lab, maybe I should move this other piece of equipment closer. And it's really about building in efficiency into the lab space.
Hmm.
But what our technology as designers has done is taken the uncertainty out of the design
Hmm.
and created higher efficiency in our lab layouts.
Hmm.
Now, there's the other component, which is the uh, how are users using this kind of technology. And I will say that we're seeing a lot more automation in the
Hmm.
lab
Yeah, yeah.
processes. So where things used to be done by human interaction, maybe not the safest environment, is now automation to do it. And the automation is faster, quicker, and safer. So a lot of our lab layouts are incorporating automated equipment. And
Excellent.
yeah,
Mark, thank you very much for your time, and I really enjoy chatting with you. Great insights. Thank you so
oh,
much.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Sure.
Have a good day, great day.
Sure.